This podcast is brought to you by Penji. Penji is a creative subscription service that gives you access to pre-vetted, agency-trained creatives from all over the world. From graphic design to illustrations to social media management and web development, it's all included for one monthly price. It's time to say goodbye to the hassle of searching for top-notch creative talent. With Penji, you get quality and consistency delivered right to your inbox every day, carefully crafted for you by humans. So meet your new creative team today. Head over to penji.co for more and enter the coupon code located within the podcast show notes.
Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to the Fully Managed podcast where we discuss marketing and business tips to help assist you on your business journey. I'm your host, Shannon, Penji's partnership coordinator, and I'm joined here today with a very special guest, John Cardone from Being Design. Thank you so much for coming on with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shannon.
I appreciate it. So could you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself, kind of how you got to this point in your career and anything you think that is relevant to the audience up until then?
Yeah, sure. This is a story I tell pretty often, not necessarily on stages or anything, usually just when I'm meeting people and they're asking me how I got into this.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to art school, and art school, I think for some people could be a good choice. I think a lot of people that get pushed into art school, it's often a bad choice. And I think that especially if you study fine art, I think a lot of people that study fine art, like myself, would have been better off doing kind of like an applied creative field. But anyway, I went to school for fine art. And so I did not just an undergraduate in fine art. I also did like a year and a half of grad school. I didn't finish it because I decided not to, but I was kind of working in the art world even before I graduated. And I was pretty ambitious at the time. But after maybe like 3 or 4 years of really being part of the art world, I made a decision that I did not want to continue the field of fine art, that I was much more interested in contributing to society, contributing to a community, contributing to, I hope to have a family in the future. And so I decided I was much more interested in doing that through business. So I tried to make a full 180 and get a job, and nobody wanted to hire me because I had this wacky fine arts degree and like a cool CV and kind of resume, but not if you were just trying to get a normal job. So really frustrated after like almost a year of trying to get a good job. I couldn't get one. And I got this kind of temp job at an art gallery. And at the art gallery, they needed to build a website because they wanted just to promote their art gallery, but also sell some of the works online. So, you could look at all the paintings they had and buy them. They had hired some agency down the street for like $5,000 or $6,000 to do it. They did a really bad job. And in the end, like it wasn't publishable. The boss felt like it's money. They couldn't do anything. And so me, in the downtime at the job, while there's no one in the art gallery, they were like, John, can you tinker and see if you can maybe figure some stuff out? And I basically rebuilt their entire Shopify site. I taught myself the Shopify's coding language, Liquid, by reading through the forums and stuff and the documentation. And then by like a month later, I had rebuilt the entire site from scratch. It was super functional. It was better than the product that they were going to get from the other agency. And I realized that I was about to hand over something like at least $5,000 worth of work that I was getting paid like $12 an hour for. So I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. So I told a white lie, and I told my boss that I was quitting because I had gotten accepted into a freelancers collective. I just made this up. And I was the freelancers collective. And then now I was so a little aside, I had been building like art portfolio websites all through school to kind of pay my way through school. I had a number of really weird odd jobs. And one of them was building websites for my professors, for people I met through the art world, for grad students, anybody else, for like events that we would put on. So I had already built a couple dozen websites at the time, but they were all like really simple, nothing like just kind of a transactional site like Shopify. So I felt like I could kind of back this up. So I said, okay, I'm quitting. I've been accepted into this freelancers collective, but you can hire me back not for $15 an hour, or not for $12 an hour, which you were paying me, but for $50. And I thought that was like a huge jump. But for her, she was like, oh, that's great. Yeah, I'll hire you right now. Finish this website. We need it. So like I spent the next week at the other that I used to work at, finishing the website, and I published it. And then she gave me a great review. And that was my first like client job as a professional. And so a few months later, I incorporated and I started what at the time was a web design company. I didn't really know the difference between like web design or development and like marketing and branding and an agency versus consultancy. I didn't know any of that. I just knew that I could build websites and figure stuff out. So that was how I got my start. And the reason that I did that and I couldn't wait is because I had proposed to my longtime girlfriend and I really wanted to get married, but her parents told me that I needed to pay for half of the wedding. And so I started a web design company really just to pay for a wedding. That was a lie. Very, yeah.
That's kind of sweet though. I mean, like I'm assuming since you're still doing it that you enjoy it and so that it's not just for a singular purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I mean, it played to my skill sets, it played to my strengths and also to my weaknesses, I guess. But, I think it also is reflective of the way I've built the rest of the business, which is that I didn't have dreams of building the world's best web design company or design agency. I had maybe like a more personal, kind of deeper goal, and this was a way to get there. But then, the reason that works is because when my clients hire us, we are not the highlight of their year. It's not like they can't wait to work with us. They're hiring us so that they can achieve some other goal. And we are instrumental in that way in helping them get closer to the goal in the same way that I was getting closer to my wedding. So it's actually been more helpful than if I was just out to make like, some kind of idealistic version of an agency.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense because I think that a lot of people are looking for that idealistic format, I suppose. But if you're just goal oriented and, you have a reason to do this job well other than just doing that job well, then, I mean, that kind of propels you to get it done.
Yeah. To that end, after like, then the wedding went over and then, yeah, I had a friend of mine who was doing something similar. So we decided to team up and then, like co-run the thing. And then we our first goal was accomplished. I paid for a wedding and now I was like, off to the races, but we didn't have another goal. So then we fell into this weird, like idealistic, dreamy quagmire and we didn't know what we were doing. We made a ton of really bad mistakes, barely made any money in that calendar year. He and I ended up parting ways professionally, although we're still very good friends. And then down the road a little ways, my wife and I wanted to have a child and like, we looked at our finances and we were like, oh, like this is not going to work, especially if you take time off of work or don't go back to work. I basically need to double the revenue. And so I had just been kind of lollygagging for like a year and a half or 2 years. And then suddenly, because there's another goal, we doubled revenue super quick. There's an actual need that happened.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that works for a lot of people. And I don't think that's really a bad thing. I need goals regularly in order to actually do anything. Like I have to like make lists for mundane tasks in order to get them done. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think some people just need to you need to have a reason to do something other than just being, I don't know, just for doing it. A lot of people just do just to do. And I don't understand that. I've never understood that mindset.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it again, even it sounds kind of comical and it always makes a good joke when I'm telling people my story, but it also has gone over very well with clients because it's very relatable for clients. Again, they're not like they're trying to accomplish a goal and being transparent about kind of the motivation structure, how things got started. A lot of the people that makes them trust you more because they're like, well, A, he's willing to say that. And then B, he understands this idea of problem solving for the goal.
Yeah. I think it's also like you have more on the line, kind of. I think that a lot of, I guess, like, I don't know, I wouldn't say a lot. There are agencies that don't have that perspective because, they're at a certain bracket where they're kind of just floating, I guess. And I think that doesn't necessarily make you want to do better. I think it's kind of similar to like those companies that have been around for so long and the only reason that people still use them is because of like brand loyalty.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of that. There's like, the whole that example, like nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM. Like if you make a corporate hire, you say, okay, we're going to contract IBM. It's like, that sounds safe because everybody does it. Even
Yeah,
if it's a
exactly.
huge waste of money, there's a lot of that kind of blind loyalty. And like probably a lot of your listeners, or probably a lot of the other people you've had on this podcast, starting from probably zero or starting from almost zero, you have the opposite of brand loyalty, total newcomer.
People are more wary, but I think that there's a level of trust when you have goals of your own, I guess. People are able to, and you're honest about them. I think that definitely builds a level of transparency too, which is really important in the agency world for people to be successful.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, so I was switch topics because I'm curious. Okay. So you started kind of just doing this, just because it was like your skill set. And, I'm assuming that you started in the art world because I'm sure you had some connections there, but you seem to have fallen into or purposely gone down the avenue of, purpose-driven founders, which I see a lot on your website. How did you kind of navigate to this kind of client, and how do you identify if this is the right person that you want to work with?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love talking about this. So even though I laid out this one narrative of me being pragmatic and goal oriented, on the other hand, I come from the art world and I went to art school. So I'm hopelessly unrealistic in some ways and very naive in plenty of ways. And so, and even like the kind of work I was doing when it was in the art world, I was doing like public funded art, community-based art, community-based placemaking, social practice stuff kind of like what Philadelphia Mural Arts, like what that whole program does, stuff of that vein.
I actually
And I was
just
very, sorry?
I actually just interviewed the marketing director of.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think I
Sure.
love them so much.
No, they do really great work. So I was really steeped in that culture, in that world of, again, like wanting to do good and saying like, well, if we're going to do this thing anyway, let's at least align it or, point it towards something that has some kind of long-term social impact. And so, because that's who I knew at the time, I knew people in art, in culture, nonprofits for the most part. Like I did know people in the art world, but I think more precisely, I knew people in arts and culture and nonprofits, which they themselves are very idealistic group of people. So, just to, again, like trying to solve the problem and solve the goal. On the one hand, I felt this need to, like, I wanted to be excited about the work I was doing because I was, I had a clean slate. I was starting from nothing. But I also, like the people that I knew and the people that I was then going to try to sell my services to, I know that they want to have an impact. So instead of leading with, oh, I'm John Cardone and our agency is going to have a big impact, I led with, I'm John Cardone and I founded basically, a creative agency, marketing agency to help you increase your impact through better branding, better marketing, better design, better development, better SEO, better all these things that you don't know how to do because that's not your specialty. If you have someone who's in your corner on your team who thinks the way you do, we can help you grow your impact. So always, framing it for their value and their dreams. So as I tried to figure out how to do that, that led me down this road, values-driven entrepreneurship, values-driven marketing. And so, probably the most common phrase that I use is, we're a values-driven, marketing consultancy. The word purpose-driven, I'm sort of shifting more into the phrase values-driven. I think it's more precise and you can have a longer conversation around values. One thing I say to people is, they're like, oh, does anyone actually care about that? Does that work? It's like, oh, it totally works. How many of you have or know someone who has stopped buying a product or stopped working with a group because you don't like something they did and you're like, oh, screw those guys, I'm never working with them again. That is a values decision. You're saying, something that they did makes me feel like our values are conflicting. And so I'm not going to buy from them or work with them ever again. And so if that negative is true, then the positive is also true. Positive is usually less decisive. We're kind of vague about it, but we are drawn towards working with individuals and teams and companies we sense have a shared set of values. And the people that I work with they're used to thinking institutionally. They're not used to thinking customer centric. They don't have a customer centric way of approaching problems. So the real secret sauce, what we started doing from like year one, and we still do now, we've gotten much, much better at it. The secret sauce is, dear client, how can we help you think in terms of what your client cares most about? Not just what they're trying to do, but the values they have and the way that they want to get that done, the way they want to live, the way they want to relate to you. If we can do that in a way that's authentic and genuine without having to without pulling the wool over anyone's eyes or becoming something we're not. If we can do that authentically, you won't have to spend as much money on promotion and advertising. You'll just start attracting the right crowd. And that kind of alignment is basic, and that's the core of what we do as a team.
What happens if you come in contact with a potential client that does not align with those values?
With my values or the idea of values alignment?
I guess the idea of values alignment, because I guess someone can have different values from you, but can still have values.
So we serve a pretty wide range of different value sets. So I definitely have some clients that would never want to meet some of my other clients because they'd be like, those people. We have, and
Okay.
I'm a little more open than some of my clients, but I tend to not ever encounter someone who doesn't buy into it. What I encounter is some people who are, maybe let's call it old school or maybe like a legacy way of thinking about business. They'll say, okay, well, I agree that's a factor, but I don't know that it's that important for our business. I don't know that it's where we should be putting our energy. And at that point, there's a follow-up. It's like, okay, well, what have you done so far? And is it working? And if it's not working, then you got to try something else. There's another way of framing that question, which is a lot of times businesses come to me like they've been in business 10 years, 15 years, 20, 25 years even. I've worked with some businesses that have been around for 50 years. And they were able to grow kind of organically to a point, but which was basically their network, like personal relationships disguised as business relationships, but it's really just personal relationships. And they weren't ever to reach a wholly new audience who would then become loyal based on impression, based on brand, right? They've not been able to do that. And they said, okay, what? And they say, yeah, we're frustrated for 5 years and we can't grow into a new audience. Like, well, okay, this is why. The reason you can't grow into a new audience is because you're relying on human beings and personal connections to make all of your brand promises for you. You haven't codified your brand promises and your values into the actual marketed brand. And so then when I frame it to them that way, that convinces most people. And I've only ever had one client that disagrees with the concept and didn't want to do it. But I've had several clients that just disagreed with the budget. And they said, well, we can't put these resources towards it, even if.
Okay, so you're explaining that there's situations in which you kind of have to tell a client that they need to have values-oriented marketing approaches, basically.
Yeah. I would say, 95 to 99% of our business is referral. So we actually don't even do that much marketing for ourselves. And in the referral process, people will come to us and say, hey, we heard that you guys do this thing. And they now they're kind of turned on to the idea. Some people, they say, oh, we just need a website. And someone said, you guys are good at websites, so I need a website. And I say, well, why do you need a website? It's like, well, because I need to break into a new audience. I say, okay, and then we go down this line of questioning. And eventually they come against this wall. And then some people say, well, I think the real problem is just not getting my name out there. I think I need to do pay-per-click advertising. I think I need to do blah, 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 blah. And so I say, okay, so we're going to put this ad up. Why are people going to click on it? And then we come right back to this idea of values connection anyway. And I think that a lot of people, when I use the phrase values alignment, they think that I'm introducing a new concept. I think that most good marketing does values alignment, even if it's unaware that it's doing it. I think that one of the marks that you've been successful is that you've accidentally or intentionally stumbled upon, values alignment.
I definitely agree with that. I think there's a lot of brands that have that you don't even realize, but they kind of leave a good taste in your mouth because they have
Mhm.
some kind of particular stance on something. For example, like um, Warby Parker gives a
Yeah.
pair of
Yeah.
glasses to someone in need of glasses every time you buy a pair of glasses, or like Tom's with the shoes.
Yeah. I mean, and like Warby Parker, it's a great example. The promise of Warby Parker is you shouldn't have to spend a lot of money to look good. That's the promise. That's the belief statement of Warby Parker. And then they deliver on that. And then and it turns out that like they apply, models that are in other businesses and they apply that to eyewear where you're like, wow, this is the most pleasant experience I've ever had buying a pair of glasses. Usually it sucks. But then they back that up, with layers and layers of experience. And then that becomes marketing as well. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely think that some of the best brands are already doing that. And sometimes even not even larger brands like the examples that I gave, but other agencies are just doing that. They have values in which they just share outwardly, but they don't even necessarily purposely brand themselves to be that way. It's just something that goes along with like their mission statement, or that's more nonprofits, I guess. Mission statements don't exactly
No,
exist for
no, no.
agencies.
It's and even there's, you've heard people say like, "Hey, I think you should work with these guys. They're not necessarily like, the world's best or flashiest, but they're good people." The right
I
way,
hear this so much.
that person's making a statement about their value priority, that they
Mhm.
value honesty, integrity, relatability over flashiness and performance.
Yeah, and I think that most people do. I at least hope. I
Yeah, yeah. Hard for you. Yeah, like,
I feel like more often than not, though, I think that people prefer a more personal approach, especially with agency work, because I think that there are obviously large companies hiring agencies for new projects, but a lot of them have like their set teams of doing things and are not hiring outward or smaller agencies to be able to complete their work, like bigger businesses, which it still happens regardless. But I think a lot of smaller businesses are the ones doing this process and going through this, and they have a lot more on the line. So they want to be able to
yeah.
work with someone that they believe is a good person, or that, at least if they're not going to do a perfect job, they'll at least be honest about it and be able to, reorient themselves to do better in the future and not, try to cost you an arm and a leg for their mistakes.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the nature of things, right? So like bigger companies need to work with bigger agencies most of the time because of they demand responsiveness, they demand consistency, they demand compliance, they demand, all these things. And so that comes at the cost of personal experience, personability, right? It doesn't feel as personal, doesn't feel you don't necessarily feel as well taken care of unless you pay a lot of money, which most people don't have. And so then, the other side, a smaller business is going to be better suited with someone smaller who can take the time to give them more personalized care. And then you run the risk of, well, if they're smaller and less experienced and they have a smaller team, like, are they not going to be as responsive? Are they not going to be as consistent? Are they not going to be as quality? Are they not going to be around forever? Right. And so I think that if that's the problem that smaller agencies have working with smaller businesses, again, and this could be mid-market business. So it's just any business is not hiring the top agencies. And so if you're on like the lower end, um, I think that the game becomes how well can you attract clients who are likely to have a good experience with you and that you are likely to make them succeed, right?
Mhm.
How well can you attract people where like everything's in your favor, right? The wind is blowing in the right direction and you have full sails. And so the way that you can do that, I think, is just by shouting your values a little louder. And I think if you
Mhm.
shout a little louder, people don't get offended. They go, "Oh, that sounds good. That reminds me of someone I might like to work with you." So I am a huge proponent of that style. Yeah.
No, I think that if you're trying to reach those people, I think that's a perfect strategy, especially then um that's I think it's not only that they will have a good experience with you and you'll have a happy client, but I think it's also you'll have a better experience.
Yeah.
If someone's that kind oriented in that way, or that's their belief system, because I just think that I don't know, a lot of agencies have to work with difficult clients, and that's, sometimes they have to for, to make money, and they can't really turn people away, or sometimes they're just doing it just because it's a really big job.
Yeah.
But I think that when you are putting your values out there, you attract people with the same values, and that makes a good experience on both ends.
Yeah. And I think that especially for smaller agencies, and I'm one of them. My agency is one of them. Um, your profit margin, I think, is on the one hand tied to, how efficiently you work and like, the pricing and all that. But on the other hand, it's tied to not screwing up and not digging holes for yourself. Because if you get the wrong client in the wrong situation at the wrong time or with the wrong values, someone that it turns out you don't actually work well with them, they don't work well with you, all of this friction completely obliterates your profit margin and sustainability. And so I think a lot of agencies, they're doing okay. And then if they look back at the book of business over the last year, they go, there was a lot of friction though. I mean, imagine if we had removed that friction, would that have made more profit or just a more pleasant experience or more free time? And so, sometimes you can even give up a little bit of top line revenue for the sake of having less friction in all of your working relationships. Because again, if you're a small agency, especially if you're a full service agency, um, friction is the enemy number one.
Yeah, and if your workers don't like working because of the type of clientele that you have, that's not really a good balance either, especially when you have a smaller agency and you depend on these people. Even if they choose to stay in that situation, you have a lot of burnout, and maybe now they're not
Yeah.
doing their best work that you hired them to do, that they're capable of doing. They just don't have the motivation to when working with a specific type of client. And I think that's like a really important thing to consider when going through picking clients or accepting them. Because, everyone needs to work well together too. It's not just, producing good work. There's so many factors that go into producing good work and outside of just ability.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. And I think, yeah, it helps if you clarify what you're setting out to do early on. Like, are you trying to grow this agency to the max, or are you trying to provide the best experience for clients that you really care about? And if your vision is more modest like that, like I'm trying to provide the best experience for clients I really care about, and we want to do really good work. Well, yeah, then if that's the case, then yeah, I recommend like dialing up that factor of friction or value, or the lack of friction because of your values alignment. I think that is it's a lever that people often feel bad about pulling because they feel like, oh, well, I got to work with everybody, and if they want to work with me, I should work with them, and then it all goes south. I think that kind of like they say when you go to college, like you should be a little selective about who you pick as your friends, because you might get stuck with these friends for the rest of your life, and maybe they weren't very good friends, right? Like be a little bit more selective, and you'll have fewer problems. And I think a lot of people who have the personalities that end up starting agencies, I'm speaking for myself and a lot of people I know, were people pleasers. So we err on the side of saying yes to stuff that we shouldn't. And I would say that if you don't tame the people pleasing, you will always have this kind of ball and chain around your ankle.
Yeah, I can definitely see that in the agency world. I genuinely, I talk to, when doing this podcast, maybe this is gonna make me sound like I'm being judgmental, but I, I didn't actually realize the sheer amount of really genuine good people that I would talk to, just because I
Mhm.
had this perception of the corporate world
Mhm.
that was maybe not the most positive. And um I really do think that that is the personality that I see a lot is
It's the person. Yeah, yeah. I think I heard once, or maybe I made this up. I don't know where, but let's say I heard it somewhere. That most of the most of the negative behavior that you experience in the corporate world is actually just a set of coping mechanisms that people have for misaligned structure, right? It's not that your boss hates you. It's not that it's not that the boss wants bad things for you. It's not that you want bad things for your boss. And it's not that the boss is like, oh, if I take advantage of everybody, I'll get a boner. And maybe those people, I'm sure those people do exist. But a lot of people are like, yeah, I don't get it. Like, we're all pretty good people, but it just sucks. And it's like, well, if you have misaligned structures, then you need coping mechanisms just to get through the day, the week, the month, the year. And those coping mechanisms, because you're going to run out of tolerance, patience, thoughtfulness, you're going to run out of all of the virtues. And then your coping mechanism is going to be bristly to everybody around you. And they're gonna be like, what's wrong with this person? It's like, this is my coping mechanism. Like, I can't handle this. This is too much. There's too much friction. There's too much incongruence. And so, this is another part that people don't think about when you're starting an agency is that, I talked about this idea that like friction is enemy number one. Friction could be between you and the client. Friction could be internal. It could be between you and a team member, you and an employee, you and a contractor, one team member to another. And so, I don't have the most successful agency in the world. I don't have the biggest agency in the world. I don't have the most profitable agency in the world, but I'm pretty good at minimizing friction. And I guess that's one of my values. And my clients usually say that, like, they're like, wow, this was like super smooth project. Like, there were no problems. It was great. I loved working with everybody. Invite me to your holiday party, like this kind of relationship. And, yeah, for me, I don't like, even if I was to make a little bit more money, the friction for me is not worth it. So that's how I approach it.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that in any format of work. Not just agency, not just business, everything. I think that any job that I've had where I've had a bad experience was because something was just left out of the equation or something just wasn't being thought about. Even simple restaurant jobs is like, oh, we're understaffed, so that's why I'm yelling at you because you can't take off.
Yeah. Right. Coping mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't want to yell at you, but I have to because I don't know what else to do. And I get that. And I think that, some people don't have the luxury to be able to move things around at certain points in their career, business, or whatever it may do. But I do think that that's something that everyone should value in order to be on the trajectory for being successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll jump in with this. This is, you didn't ask for this. This will be unsolicited advice to all of you.
No, we like advice. That's the point.
So when I first started, if you think about this idea of having insecurity or imposter syndrome, which is just insecurity in a certain situation, imposter syndrome is really just insecurity. I had a lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of insecurity because I didn't come from a business world. I felt like I'd never been exposed to it growing up, certainly not in school. I never had like a real job. I've never had a real job. I've never had a 40-hour-a-week W-2 job. I've never had a salary. I've never had benefits. I've never had any of that stuff. So I don't even know what it's like. And so I'm trying to like sell to companies who are that. And I don't know what their life is. And then I'm trying to hire people into work for my company. And I don't know what their expectation is. And then, also there's all this insecurity. And I would say that the worst thing that I did in the first four years of my business was I looked at like what corporate life was. And I was like, oh, let me imitate that. Because if it lasts, it must be durable. And if it's durable, it must be good. So I'll just do that. And so like, I had like, 1.5 employees and I was like imitating corporate speed. And I was like, why are you doing this? Like, this is making no sense. We were like, some was pretense, but I thought that like, that was expected of me by hiring. I had all this insecurity about what was expected of me. And when I finally understood how the real world works, I completely flipped the script, which is that the corporate world is not something to be aspired to. It's the coping mechanism. It's the coping structure for stuff that's really hard to do. To get a whole team to work on the one goal together when they're really not that invested in it. Like that, all of corporate structure is designed to mitigate that. And so I was like, well, if we didn't have that problem, then we wouldn't need the mitigation.
Yeah.
Don't have this misalignment, I wouldn't need to like cajole people into doing what I want them to do. If we didn't have, it goes on and on. And so, it was like year 4 or maybe, between year 4 and 5. I mean, that's a long time to making such a bad mistake. I kind of just turned the whole thing upside down and took the attitude of like, okay, I like the way this person works. I think that they can work almost autonomously. And if they work with me, I can help them do even better work than they would alone. Even they could work alone, but I'm going to help them do better work than they do alone. And then I asked the question, how can I give you support structure and resources and situation so that you can do even better work than you're doing now? Because that's going to be good for you, for the client, for me, for everybody. And then you'll stick around, and then I won't even have to keep you in line because you'll just be in line. Like you will want to be in line because that's the best place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that reversal, the way I was building the business on the inside, like kind of the internal, thinking about HR, ops, all that stuff. And again, like I have a tiny agency. This is like I don't want this to sound grandiose, but even just flipping the way of thinking about it made all the difference.
No, and I really appreciate you saying that because I think, well, hopefully when this comes out, when people hear that, maybe it'll like jumpstart something in their head about it. Because I do think that this is probably a pretty common problem in agencies imitating corporate structures.
Yep.
Specifically because that's something, they assume that, building themselves up has to incorporate these structures because that's just what's been happening. But I think you're
Yeah.
completely right. And what you're saying is that, these are put into place to mitigate the issues that it has. And I think that that's why
Mhm.
people really make, consistently make jokes about how horrible the corporate world is. And I think that's the biggest reason is because of those dynamics that are created from the stress and the
Yep.
lack of,
Yeah.
proper institutions to fix it.
Yeah. And, when COVID happened, that put a strain on a lot of us. And then we were all obviously fully remote. And I realized that people's situation were changing, their financial situation was changing. So in the spirit of like, how can I set this up for you as a team member? I asked my team members, like, would you guys rather be W-2 employees or 1099? Like, you tell me, let's do whatever's best for you. And since then, this kind of structure that we've adopted is I let everybody choose, which maybe sounds weird, but I mean, I ask people and they choose consistently, which is that someone who's a specialist at delivery and fulfillment. So web designer, web developer, graphic designer, SEO specialist, copywriter, any of these people, they prefer to be 1099 because they're working project-based. Whereas someone like an admin or a project manager, sales could be commission, but those people prefer to be employees because their work is based in the day, the week, the month. Theirs is more cycle-based where the other ones are project-based. And I did this kind of out of desperation. I'm not saying it like I'm prescribing it as the best solution, but I, after running it for a few years, I actually really, really love it, which is, I'm providing support, and also a good balance of support and freedom for the talent. And then I'm providing a different kind of support for the people who are really like internal, which are, admin, project manager, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that makes your employees feel cared about too. Everyone has their own individual way of wanting to do something and they can still do their work efficiently, even if it's not an ideal way for everyone within the same business. I think that if you're able to reach your goals in your own way, I don't understand why that would ever be a problem. And I think that a lot of people, because they see how they think that structures in a business should be a certain way or it should be that way. They kind of force people into these like cookie cutter
Yeah.
positions.
And going back to this idea of alignment, if I have a web developer who's getting paid to develop websites, which are project-based, the website has a budget, and that project has a budget. There has to be some margin that gets taken out for the business, and then the rest is to pay the people employed in building it. And so if I pay that person hourly, there's a completely misaligned incentive structure. Those incentives take as long as possible, and mine is to get them to take as little time as possible. So then there's this burden of management. And I'm like, I have to manage them or supervise them. Whereas if I just say, hey, how long do you think it's going to take you to get this done? What can we budget your contribution? And then can we build the project? And then they're incentivized to work even more efficiently than they did on the last project. And then they love it because they get paid the same and they have more free time. And whereas someone who is tied to a revenue stream that is weekly or monthly, maybe it makes more sense for them to be, on a wage or a salary. And so, yeah, I think that this idea of alignment can be taken pretty far, and it's working. I mean, it's working so far.
Well, I'm happy that it's working, and I think that it's a really good idea. I would hope that people would implement something like it, or at least meet their employees in the middle a little more. I think that's a really great strategy in order to minimize friction. And I think that the agency world does have this imposter syndrome very heavily. And I think that
Culture.
I think that navigating that in ways in which you gave an example of, I think that's really great, and I hope that I can see that more.
Yeah, and I would say it's even to the point that clients mention it, right? Like the clients experience the difference in that.
Well, that is, I mean, that's just proof that it's working, and it's working well. That's really great for clients to be able to see it as well, because that's something that's, very difficult. I think to translate. Sometimes, clients don't really notice the structure of an agency most of the time, unless it's poor.
Yeah, yeah.
To recognize that it's good is really, really good. However, this is all the time we have today, but I really, really appreciate this. I think that this was really great advice, and I truly don't think that someone's touched on this before in my many, many podcasts. So I really appreciate it, because it's something that I think is really important, and I hope that more people implement this down the line. I think agency work is definitely improving. Like, the more I talk to people, the more I see similar values as you do of like doing good. And so that makes me happy to hear. So I hope that continues to happen.
Yeah, cool. And if any of you are listening to this and you were thinking about starting an agency, or now you think you'd rather not, and you'd rather work with someone who's already done it, let me know. Maybe we can work together.
That would be great. And yeah, and thank you everyone for listening or watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to gain more knowledge like I do on this podcast every time. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thank you, Shannon. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to Fully Managed, brought to you by Penji. Check out the show notes to learn more about today's guest, and to learn more about Penji, the human-first creative subscription service, head over to penji.co. And by the way, if you're still listening, it would mean the absolute world to us if you were to share this podcast with a friend, and of course, subscribe.